So we're going to start our Thanksgiving class today talking about the turkey. And the reason is because it's not completely clear whether the turkey should be kosher. So let's talk about kosher birds here for a moment. So I'm going to share my screen. And great, that's not the screen I want to show you. There we go. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Okay, birds. What's a kosher bird? So the Torah does a very interesting thing when it comes to the kashrut of animals. There's a chapter in Vayikra where it talks about what animals are kosher, and it says basically if an animal chews its cud and has split hooves, it's a kosher animal. And if it's a fish and it has fins and scales, mostly really scales, because all fish with scales have fins, and we're not talking about dermal scales, the kind that would bleed when you pull them off the fish. This kind of scales that come easily off of a fish makes if it has those scales, the fish is kosher. What about birds? What makes a bird kosher? Because not all birds are kosher. So the Torah gives a list of animals, of birds that are kosher and not kosher, and the definitions of those words is up to dispute. There's argument about which ones of those birds are kosher, which ones are not. I mean, which ones of those birds are what they are? Which one's an eagle? Which one's a heron? An owl? So as you see the pictures in front of you now, the uh, the the one of the classic ways to know if a bird is kosher is by Misora. In other words, if you know that your ancestors ate a particular bird, then regardless of whether it fits a particular definition of a name according to some opinion, if your ancestors were Torah observant Jews and they ate a particular bird, in that region, that bird is kosher. That's one of the rules. Another rule made particularly popular after the discovery of the turkey is the simanim. Now, there's the signs of what a kosher bird is. So, what one thing that most kosher birds have in common, several things they have in common, is they're not, for instance, carnivorous. They don't eat other animals. They don't eat other birds. They don't eat carcasses and such. They have uh, their feet have certain physical shapes. They're missing. They don't have a certain digit that carnivorous birds have that they hunt or used to hunt with in previous generations. Um, so those are some of the things to look for in a kosher bird. Uh, Interestingly enough, historically, in America, several birds were found that did not exist in what's called the Old World, in Europe and in Asia, in the Middle East, and such. So these New World birds were an anomaly. We didn't know if they were kosher or not. So when they were brought back to Europe, there was discussion about whether the bird was kosher or not. And one of the birds, interestingly enough, is the pheasant. But we know the Slav, as it's called in Hebrew, is an animal that was eaten by the Jews in the desert when they complained that they did not have meat. God sent pheasant to them, and they were able to eat pheasant. That's all good and well if the pheasant is only one kind of bird. But what happened was when people were traveling in America and getting further and further west, they found all kinds of birds that they named pheasant, even though they weren't all related to each other in any way, shape, or form. So some pheasants are kosher and some pheasants are not. That's actually a kashrut issue nowadays with the popularization of the sale of pheasant eggs, which is so the egg of an egg is only kosher if it comes from a kosher bird, right? So an ostrich egg, as popular as it may be now in San Diego, is still not a kosher food because the ostrich itself is not a kosher food. So anyway, so back to the turkey. So the turkey comes along, gobbles into Europe, and the European rabbis need to decide whether that is a kosher animal. So that was back in the 1600s, right? So about good 400 years ago, the turkey was introduced to Jewish communities in Europe, and all kinds of authorities had to come up with opinions about whether it was appropriate to eat or not. And the Ramah, who is the Ashkenazic opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, he said that one does not eat any animal, any bird that we do not have a tradition to eat at all. So there was no tradition to eat turkey. Turkey did not exist. So therefore, he would say that the turkey is not kosher, and he was not alone. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, Beit Shlomo, in Yuradea also writes similarly that indeed the turkey is not a kosher animal to eat, not a kosher bird. So, can we eat turkey? So you might have noticed in the supermarkets where turkey is sold and kosher turkey is sold, you'll find Empire and other brands with legitimate hechsherim. They have kosher symbols. They seem to be kosher. And we also know not that this is a proof that the turkey is a kosher animal, but the biggest consumer per capita of turkey meat is the country of Israel. So it seems like most people seem to think it's a kosher animal, so a kosher bird. So the vast majority, the reason for that is that the vast majority of halachic authorities, after examining turkeys and their habitats, decided that turkeys are more like kosher animals than not kosher animals. And they were basically subsumed under the category of chickens, geese, and duck, which are all kosher and all have similar characteristics to the turkey. They don't eat meat. They don't prey on other animals. They live in similar habitats and such. So that's the main reason why turkey is considered kosher by most opinions. There's normative practice in America. Obviously, the majority of all the major kosher certification organizations all overwhelmingly conclude that turkey is a kosher animal. So, but just so you know, there is reason to suspect that perhaps it's not, and that is that there's no Masorah at all for a Jewish kosher person to eat a turkey before the year 1600 of the Common Era. So that's one topic. If there's no questions on that, we'll go on to the next topic. All right, next, idolatrous holidays. Is or was Thanksgiving a religious holiday of another religion? Very important issue, and that is because besides the issue that we're going to talk about as well, about imitating Jewish, non-Jewish Gentile customs, which we talked about with regard to Halloween, there's a specific pasuk in Vayikra 18:3 that says that we're not supposed to copy or imitate the customs of the non-Jews. Now, we said then in that class that there's several conditions for that. There's several ways to know if it's an idolatrous practice. For example, breathing. Is breathing an idolatrous practice? Well, the Gentiles do it. Idolaters breathe. Does that mean we're not allowed to breathe? Of course not. That's ridiculous. So what is it that they can't do that they're doing that we can't copy? What exactly? What are the qualifications for that? So the main thing that makes it a Gentile custom that we're not allowed to copy is when it makes no other sense, when it makes no logical sense. Breathing makes sense. We need to breathe. We need carbon dioxide. Right? We need to expel carbon dioxide. We need oxygen. We need to expel carbon dioxide, and that's how the breathing cycle works. And we need it to survive. If we don't breathe, we don't do very well, and with or without our mask. So the issue becomes then: is Thanksgiving a holiday that it has customs in it that make no sense. So, so that's when it comes to chupat goyim, to copying Gentile customs. But before we even get to that, we also have another issue, and that is Thanksgiving a religious holiday for another religion? And if that's the case, then that's avodah zarah, which is a much more serious offense that we have to consider first of all. So let me give you an example of an idolatrous religious event. Bathing in the Ganges, right? It's a spiritual, existential experience that the Hindu people of India perform on a regular basis. If a Jewish person wants to perform it for spiritual reasons, so that would be a halachic problem of avodah zarah, of idol worship. We are following another religion. That would be an issue. If you're doing it because there's no other water available and you really want to wash in dirty Ganges water, that's another issue. Maybe that's for if you want to do it for some other reason, perhaps that could be allowed under certain circumstances. But as long as it's a religious practice of another religion and it makes there's no other reason to do it, so then you should not do that practice. That is part of the prohibition against avodah zarah. Okay, so what if you're invited? So this is a different topic. In about a month, there's going to be another holiday. It's a Gentile holiday, pretty popular, and there's often office parties related to that holiday. The office Christmas party, let's call it. Let's be explicit here. Is the Jew allowed to attend such a gathering? So you could answer, there's nothing religious going on. It's just people getting drunk and taking photocopying their faces on the copy machine. There's nothing serious. There's nothing religious about this. It's just an opportunity to get together, eat a lot of food, and get presents you'll never use, so you can regift them next year. So you could say that, but unfortunately, there is an issue of attending a party that is directly, at least, allowing or facilitating any religious observance of another religion. Right? So even though there might not be an explicit prayer time in your office party, the fact that there could be, even in theory, that creates an issue. And there are ways that a Jew could attend or could even facilitate an office holiday party without it being about Christmas. But that's a discussion for another day. Meanwhile, the question is, right now, is Thanksgiving a religious holiday? We need to know the history of Thanksgiving. So it's actually a complicated history. And the author of Lies My Teacher Told Me, Professor Lewin, writes very convincingly that our idea of why we celebrate Thanksgiving is very wrong and historically inaccurate. But aside from that, let's talk about what we do think, what most people think is the basis of the Thanksgiving holiday. Back in 1622, 1623, that winter, the pilgrims in America had a particularly harsh winter and barely survived. And the fact that they survived, they wanted to thank God for surviving. And because then for some reason, they had an excess amount of food, they also invited neighboring Native American groups with which they were friendly and peaceful, and they invited them to this meal. This is back in, like I said, 1623. Actually, interestingly enough, it was in July 30th, 1623. Very, very far removed from the winter. It's literally the middle of summer, right? In July 30th, they had a celebration, and then throughout New England through the 1600s, they would continue to have similar, different communities would have different Thanksgiving celebrations whenever they got through a difficult winter. That was a local, not at all national holiday. Everything was very local and very personalized, all until 1789. In 1789, President George Washington issued the first national Thanksgiving proclamation, setting November 26th, 1789, as a national holiday. This is what it says in the proclamation. And now, therefore, I do recommend and assign Thursday, the 26th day of November next, to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, and that will, or that will be, that we may then all unite in rendering unto him our sincere and humble thanks for his kind care and protection of the people of this country previous to their becoming a nation, for the signal and manifold mercies and the favorable interpositions of his providence in the course and conclusion of the late war, for the great degree of tranquility, union, and plenty which we have since enjoyed, for the peaceable and rational manner in which we have been able to establish constitutions of government for our safety and happiness, and particularly the national one now and lately instituted, for the civil and religious liberty with which we are blessed, and the means we have of acquiring and diffusing useful knowledge, and in general for all the great and various favors which he has been pleased to confer upon us. Thanksgiving is a holiday George Washington established to thank God. Let's call it that. He doesn't call it God. He was more or less a deist, which is basically somebody who believed in God, but not any official religion. I'm not going to get into that now. But that's the idea was to thank God for the fact that we have survived such a long time, and that we've made inroads, that we've been successful, and that we have so many great things. And freedom. Where does it say? So why aren't we celebrating Thanksgiving on the 26th this year, or are we? What date is Thursday this year? Yeah, Thursday the 26th. Okay, it works out. Okay, so so in general, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving on Thursday the 26th. It just happens to be this year, the 26th of November is Thursday, so Washington was right. But in general, that's not the case. So it was 1846 when a lady by the name of Miss Sarah Joseph Hale, who was the author of Godey's Lady book, she made a campaign. She spent like almost 20 years on a campaign to make Thanksgiving an official national holiday. And then in 1863, then President Lincoln signed a proclamation making it the third Thursday of every November National Thanksgiving. Okay. And why is this all important? Why is the date especially so important? By the way, he picked this particular time to make Thanksgiving a national holiday to help the turkey farmers who were suffering at the time. Interesting little tidbit. But here's the important thing. If we're making a particular holiday in a particular date, that becomes an issue. Reb Moshe Feinstein writes in Igros Moshe on the issue of joining with those who think that Thanksgiving is like a holiday to eat a meal, since it is clear that according to their religious law books, this day is not mentioned as a religious holiday, and one is not obligated in a meal according to Gentile religious law. And since this is a day of remembrance to citizens of this country when they came to reside here either now or earlier, halacha sees no prohibition in celebrating with a meal with the eating of turkey. That's Rav Moshe Feinstein explicitly saying that since there's no religious law, it doesn't say in the Christian Bible you have to have Thanksgiving. Then this is a holiday George Washington made up. He was barely Christian himself, so it's not a religious holiday per se, even though religion is a part of it. We're thinking not just your neighbor, we're thinking God. There is a mention of religion, but it's not a religious holiday because it doesn't fit into any religion where it says you have to keep Thanksgiving on this day. I hope I'm being clear. So Rabbi Yehuda Herzl Henkin writes similarly that halacha does not consider Thanksgiving to be a religious holiday, and even if one lived in a society where there's some religious denominations that celebrate Thanksgiving, religiously, right? They go to church, perhaps they have a ceremony, they have a whole ceremony of how they eat, where they eat, etc., etc. That's not sufficient to make it a religious holiday, and it is clear that many secular people, obviously secular people, celebrate Thanksgiving even without mention of religion at all. Even those authorities who would permit making Thanksgiving with a meal sometimes do not permit doing so with a Gentile who is religiously celebrating the holiday. This is obviously true for other ceremonies, weddings, funerals. It becomes, if a Gentile is making it into a religious ceremony, then certainly that would be a problem celebrating with them. Okay, so that's what we have so far on the issue of whether it's a religious holiday. And if it's a religious holiday, it's avodah zarah to celebrate it with them, and that would be a problem. So Rabbi Henkin also recommends that perhaps it might be a good idea to, every once in a while, to skip Thanksgiving, to skip the meal of Thanksgiving, because that way you're telling yourself, you're making it very clear that it is not a religious obligation, it's not a religious duty to have this meal, and then therefore you are you're making sure it's not a religious holiday. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So let's continue. So further, so that was whether it's a religious holiday at all, and whether it's avodah zarah. Now, even if it's not avodah zarah, there could be another issue, and that is called chukat akum. We're not supposed to do irrational activities of a Gentile society. So the Gemara's example, by the way, was in avodah zarah. It talks about a society where there was an obligation to wear purple shoelaces. Okay, not for any logical reason, right? It's not like purple shoelaces chased away, chased away dogs or anything like that. They just wore purple shoelaces for some time, and the rabbis declared at the time that to do such a thing would be asur, would be not allowed, because we're copying the Gentiles for no logical reason. Remember, as I said earlier, this is different than breathing, where we are allowed to copy the Gentiles and also breathe, Baruch Hashem. But we're breathing because that's logical. That makes sense. Wearing a mask outside during a pandemic is logical. It makes sense. If it's just a certain style that makes no logical sense, so perhaps it would be an issue of chukat akum, and that's why it's not recommended. This issue comes up very often when it comes to things like earrings and nose rings, double earrings, and things like that. I'm not qualified to discuss that right now. But back to this: is Thanksgiving a chukat akum? Is it a Gentile practice that is really irrational? So, and again, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Halloween, or Halloween is a holiday that people celebrate religiously. It's a religious holiday. So, even though most people don't celebrate it for religious reasons nowadays, because the celebration has no rational reason, there's no rational reason to celebrate that day in the way that they do. So, there's no reason for us to celebrate it. And it would be chukat akum. So that was when we talked about the issue of Halloween. But in regards to Thanksgiving, it's a little bit different. And that's because Thanksgiving is a not only an American holiday, it is a patriotic holiday. There is a reason for it. Um, it's not an idolatrous custom. It's not just a foolish custom found in some communities or something like that. The Ramah says that those practices done as a Gentile custom or law with no reason one suspects, and that in an idolatrous practice, or that there's a taint of idolatrous origins, that would also not be allowed. So in other words, even if it makes sense and it's something you can do, but the reason for it is probably related to something religious of another religion, so then it's a problem. And therefore, we should not do that either. That's also chukat akum, even though it's not actual avodah zarah. And it's not an actual religious practice. Its roots are in a religious practice. So is Thanksgiving rooted in a religious practice? Is thanking God a religious practice? No, it's an activity. It's not a practice. It's not something that you have to always do. And therefore, and it's, again, Thanksgiving is not mentioned in the holy in the halachot of the Gentile religions. So it's not considered that at all. Some authorities are strict, like the Vilna Gaon. It says only the only time the secular customs are permissible is when they actually have a Jewish origin. The Thanksgiving does not actually have a Jewish origin, although somebody sent me something just today that talks about how Jews kept Thanksgiving in the 1600s as well. So that's nice, but I'm not sure how I'm not sure that they were the inspiration for it. In other words, who started it? Uh, so Rab Moshe Feinstein, for instance, elsewhere writes in a more strict opinion about Thanksgiving that it would be prohibited to do it if you have some sort of ritual that you associate with Thanksgiving. You have to do things a certain way. That's a problem. Perhaps he gives the example of reciting a text or singing a song, not just eating a meal. If you're just eating a meal, that's not a ritual. We eat, that's fine. Uh, but to do it as a ritual, you know, you know, I know people have customs of, oh, the more chashuv person in the family, cuts the turkey. These kinds of rituals are problematic. And so maybe if you do celebrate Thanksgiving with the eating of turkey, perhaps trying to make sure you don't have any ritualistic reasons for it. And it wouldn't hurt to include, some Jewish ideas. For example, we are thankful, we are grateful, we should be thankful. We live in a wonderful country. Baruch Hashem still has lots of freedoms, and we want to thank Hashem for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's something we should be doing every day. Now, the next question is that I had emailed to you earlier is celebrating the holiday obligatory? In other words, do you have to celebrate Thanksgiving? And the answer is, of course not. In fact, if you think it is obligatory, we have a problem. And that is that we're not allowed to add mitzvot. And you're saying, by saying it's obligatory for every person to celebrate Thanksgiving with the eating of a turkey, et cetera, then that is a problem. You're adding mitzvot, Baal Tosef. We do not add mitzvot to the Torah. It says Rav Moshe specifically, explicitly, he says, it is prohibited to establish this as an obligation and religious commandment, as a mitzvah. It remains a voluntary celebration now. In this manner, without the establishment of obligation or religious commandment, one can celebrate the next year too with a meal. But he says he thinks, nonetheless, it is prohibited to establish a fixed day in the year for the celebration. It is only in the first year of the event that's not a problem. So what is he talking about with establishing it as a day, a particular day? And we talked about this earlier. That's why I brought that up about how George Washington made it the November 26th, and then Abraham Lincoln said no, the third Thursday. Why is that important? That's important because there is an issue. This is going to be this might be new information for some of you, so I apologize. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask. There is an issue with keeping the Gentile calendar. Okay, let me explain. Obviously, we need to use the Gentile calendar if you want to know what the date is, or when the tax year ends, or when the school year starts. It's a good reference point. However, in previous generations, it was looked down upon to use the Gentile calendar, not just because almost every single month in the Gentile calendar is named after a god in some Gentile mythology. Aside from that, we have the issue of we have our own calendar. We have the Jewish calendar. It's not just called Jewish calendar for cultural reasons. There's a religious. We're supposed to know the dates. We're supposed to know which day of Kislev it is today, right? About 20 days till Hanukkah, by the way. So, and so we're supposed to not just be proud of our calendar, which is a beautiful, very accurate, scientifically accurate calendar. But aside from that, we are people who follow the moon in a sense. Well, we also follow the sun. In other words, the solar calendar is important for our holidays as well. And we'll every 28 years we have Birkat Chama, etc. But and the Molad is affected by the solar system. The the I'll give you an example. I'll give you a story. Maybe I'll be more clear that way. The Brisker Rav, who was famous for being very medactic, very careful about keeping halakha, so he once purchased a Sefer Torah to be written by a sofer. This is about 100 years ago or so. And the sofer, uh, as they tend to do when they finish a particular segment, they bring it to be double checked by someone else, and they sign their name and they write the date just to be able to establish where they're holding. So when the Brisker Rav saw the Sefer Torah and the dates written that were being done as he was checking it halfway through, he noticed that the sofer was using the secular date. And not just the secular date, but the secular numbers for the dates, which is even a bigger problem because then we're being beholden to the number, as if this is the 11th month, which it's not, as if this is the year 2020, which it's not, right? So saying that today's date is 11/23/2020, where is actually a halachic issue. There are ways around it, of course, but suffice it to say, some people are very careful about these things. So he saw that the sofer was not careful about this, and he immediately told his gabbai, "We're not buying the Sefer Torah from the sofer." He paid the sofer for the work that he had done up to that point. That's the Brisker Rav. He was very careful about that kind of halacha as well, being fair and honest. So he paid the sofer. But on the other hand, he said, "What's the main job of a sofer? It's not just a good handwriting. A main job of a sofer is to have yirat shamayim, to be careful about mitzvah observance. But if this sofer is writing the secular date, so he's not as careful as he should be. He should be writing the Jewish date, right? So that's why some people are careful when they write the date. They don't write. They wouldn't write the date 11/23/2020. They would write, for example, instead of November, they'd write NOV because they don't want to give credence to the secular name of the month even. So NOV 23 apostrophe 20, right? Not 2020. It's not 20. It's not 2020 years after anything significant for us. Why are we giving any credence to 2020? Somebody said, I remember, was it? Yeah, it must have been. It was 10 days ago. So it was Friday the 13th. It was Friday the 13th, 2020, and somebody said, "Ooh, I wonder what terrible things are going to happen today." And I answered very simply, "Nothing's going to happen today. Nothing unusual is going to happen today. Friday the 13th, 2020 means absolutely nothing to the Jewish person. It's the 13th of what? The 13th of November? November doesn't mean anything to me. 2020? What does 2020 mean? It's just a date I put on my on my checks. It's the date that the IRS is gonna see when they do my taxes, right? It doesn't mean anything significant to me beyond that. It's just a reference point. It's not 2020 years after any important significant event for me. So now we understand a little bit, I hope, why it's important that Thanksgiving is not on a particular date, because then it would be a problem to celebrate it. If it was always November 26th, and you have to celebrate Thanksgiving on November 26th, therefore it would be a problem to celebrate it. And in fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner writes, it is obvious and apparent that whatever the merit of celebrating Thanksgiving the first time was in the 1600s, establishment of an annual holiday that is based on the Christian calendar is at the very least closely associated with idol worship and is thus prohibited. So Rav Yitzhak Hutner, would say that celebrating Thanksgiving is prohibited. So he argues that such a celebration becomes a holiday through the creation of an annual observance, and celebrating Gentile holidays is obviously wrong. So, to counter that, Rav Brody writes that perhaps it's not a specific date, because it's not the 26th of November anymore. It happens to be this year, it is, but it's the third Thursday. And since that can change the date that it's going to be, because last year it was the 23rd or whatever it was, and next year, who knows which date of November it's going to be. It's the third Thursday, could be any number of days. I haven't done the math to figure out what the variance is, but certainly it could be any day, and it doesn't have to be the 26th. And therefore, according to Rabbi Brody, and therefore, by the way, many other people, which is Rav Moshe, it is not a holiday that we have to stay away from for that reason. So I'm just giving different reasons that there are problems and different solutions, perhaps. Next possible problem with Thanksgiving is Shabbat. What's the problem with Shabbat? Any ideas? So what do most people do? Right? Thanksgiving is the third Thursday. You eat your giant meal. You got your mashed potatoes and your pumpkin pie, and you got your turkey, and you got rolls, and then you're stuffed. And then Friday morning, you have to maneuver around to the stores for the Black Friday sales, and what happens is you run out of time to prepare for Shabbat. Oy vey, oy vey. Didn't prepare for Shabbat. Don't have chalot, but we still have our rolls from yesterday. We didn't cook meat. Oh, we still have turkey from yesterday. We don't have pumpkin pie. Oh, we still have some slices left from yesterday. So what ends up happening on Shabbat? And some people plan it this way. What ends up happening is you're eating the leftovers on Shabbat. The special day was Thursday. Thursday night was the special day, and Friday night is the bathwater. Right? Friday night is the leftovers. Shabbat, leftovers. Shabbat is supposed to be special. Shabbat is what you're supposed to be planning for the whole week. We talked about how Hillel and Shammai, when they went shopping, obviously separately, they might have shopped in different stores, but Hillel and Shammai, when they went shopping during the week, they would try to find the best food for Shabbat, the best fish, right? They'd go out early and try to find the best things that they can get. And then if they found something better later, they would buy a new one. Shammai would anyway. All right. What are we doing? How are we celebrating the Shabbat? The holy, holy Shabbat. Special meal. Special 3 meals, even in winter. So how are we supposed? What are we supposed to do? So there's a few solutions. One is, of course, to make something special for Shabbat, aside from the Thanksgiving meal. My solution, the one I like and the one that I try to use, is we have our Thanksgiving meal, brace yourselves, on Friday night. What? Thanksgiving on Friday? That's right. Even though President Lincoln said it has to be the third Thursday, I don't listen to him. I don't poskin like him. Even though his first name is Abraham, that doesn't make him an expert in all things Jewish. And therefore, I don't have to listen to President Lincoln's halachot. And if he says that it's the third Thursday, it doesn't have to be third Thursday. It could be the Friday after the third Thursday, which is Shabbat. And that's the day that I make special. By the way, there's a lot of good deals that way and a lot less stress. And then Thursday is a day to relax, etc., etc. And then we go into Shabbat all ready for the pumpkin pie and the turkey and the mashed potatoes and gravy. Okay, so that's the plan that in the Rosenberg family this year, I hope. So that's the solution to a lot of issues, not just Shabbat, but it's also the solution to the problem of the calendar and the problem of chukat akum and everything else. So it's an easy solution, and I think it makes things a lot easier. And also, by the way, I don't know if I should tell you because then I'm going to possibly lose out. Sometimes there's some good deals Friday morning uh, on things on Thanksgiving related products that the stores didn't think they'd sell. Right, uh, so that's just an interesting way to look at it. And if you have any questions about that, uh, please unmute yourselves and ask. All right, next halachic issue. It's called achila gasa. Okay, achila gasa is overeating, stuffing yourself. Right. So it's mentioned in the Torah in Devarim 23:25. It's mentioned in the Gemara several places, Bava Metzia 87b. It's also mentioned, of course, in Halachot, in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, in Hilchot Sechirot 12:11, and in the Shulchan Aruch and Mishpat 336:14. There is definitely an issue with a Jewish person eating too much. Okay, we're supposed to eat to survive. We're supposed to eat till we're satisfied, but not past that. Now, there are religions where overeating is one of the 7 deadly sins. It's not a deadly sin. It might be deadly. It's not good for your health, but and health is a very important thing to take care of. We talked about that in previous classes as well. But overindulging in food is something we look down upon. And if you think of Thanksgiving as the day to pig out, as many people do, right? That's what this holiday is. It's a day. It's a requirement. You have to stuff yourself till your till your belt buckle breaks, right? So if that's how you feel about Thanksgiving, so it's a problem, and it needs to be worked on. You eat enough. Eat till you're satisfied. That's fine, but don't eat more than that. There are ways, there are little tricks that people have to avoid overeating. My suggestion, not that I'm a big expert in this, but my suggestion is to not take seconds. That's so. In other words, when you're filling your plate, fill it to a normal amount that you think you will need to eat. And if you're done and you still want more, hold off, breathe. You're not hungry anymore. It should pass. Your hunger pain should pass, and as long as you took the right amount to begin with. That's an important skill as well, I guess. Okay. So next topic is not an easy topic to talk about, not because it's controversial, but because I have a very mixed crowd here. I have people from all around, all through the Jewish spectrum listening tonight. And Baruch Hashem, I don't want anyone I'm not being judgmental in any way, but what I'd like you to know is that there is an issue in Judaism called bitul zman, called wasting time. Time is a very precious thing. Time is the only real thing you have in this world. You're given time, 120 years, and you have a mission to accomplish, and that's what you're supposed to do with your time. Wasting time is quite a problem. When we talked about Rabbi, I mentioned this briefly, very briefly, when we talked about Shlomo Carlebach. One of the controversial things about him when he got started was he was holding concerts, and who would go to these concerts? Religious people who were otherwise they'd cancel a chavruta. Yeshiva bachurim would skip a seder. People who are doing all kinds of different mitzvot would stop doing those mitzvot to go to a concert. So that's an issue. That was very controversial. The Rosh Yeshiva spoke out against this. There is room to say that we need time to relax, we need time to recharge, we need vacation time, we need relaxation time, diversion time, we need time to listen to music. Uh, there's especially music with an emotional appeal will help elevate our souls. I'm not arguing any of that, but to purposely waste time is an issue. So on Thanksgiving, is there a problem? Excuse me a moment. Is there a problem for yeshivas and for shuls to rearrange their Torah and prayer schedules to accommodate Thanksgiving? In other words, can a synagogue that has services usually, say, at 6 on a Thursday at 6:05 in the morning, can that synagogue on Thanksgiving have services at 8 o'clock? Let people sleep in. So it's a problem because, in theory, these people after 6:05, after services, they're supposed to go to work, they're supposed to learn, supposed to do other things. If you're having services at 8 o'clock, you're not giving people the chance to learn because they're going to sleep in and they're going to get up. They're going to go to services at 8 o'clock. They're going to be done at 9 o'clock. They're going to come home and eat breakfast. And by the time they're done with breakfast, it's almost midday, right? And especially on these winter days when it's dark already, it's mincha time at 4:30 or so. They're not going to have time to do anything. They're not going to have time to learn. It's a problem. So Rabbi Henkin notices it is not prohibited to delay the time of morning services to reflect the fact that many are off of work on Thanksgiving. However, on a legal holiday that is also, he says, it also a Gentile religious holiday, such as December 25th, he advises that it's better to ignore the secular holiday for scheduling purposes. So there are Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Henkin included, that it's all right to adjust the schedule to accommodate, let people sleep in a little bit. Rabbi David Cohen writes that it is best not to change the time of prayer, even on Sunday, and certainly not to do so on Gentile holidays, of course, because that would be as if we're celebrating that Gentile holiday. Interestingly enough, I'll tell you a quick story of a descendant of the Brisker the Rav Soloveitchik of YU. So he famously started shiur much earlier than usual on Thanksgiving. He would have on Thanksgiving, he would have an earlier class. Why? In order to end earlier than usual and catch the plane back to his home in Boston. He lived in Boston. He would fly into YU to give a class. And in there, he would have his festive meal. Obviously, he kept Thanksgiving with all the trimmings. However, it is of interest to note that while Thanksgiving appeared to be of sufficient importance to change the fixed time for shiur, it was not sufficient time to end shiur if the Rav had not completed what he wanted to understand. One famous Thanksgiving in 1976, there was a shiur that the Rav spent about 5 hours, mostly in silent thought, working through one Tosfot. After a second or third time, the Shamash passed him a note about a flight back to Boston. The Rav turned to him and said almost angrily, "No one can leave here until we have understood what it is that Tosfot is saying. Torah should be increased on Thanksgiving, not decreased on such an opportune day. This is our chance. This is a beautiful day to give thanks to Hashem. We live in, like I said, in a wonderful country, a golden Medina, right? It's a beautiful place with a lot of wonderful people, and we're surrounded by such ahava. It's a world of chesed, and we should celebrate it. We should be very happy that we live in such a society and we live in such a world. And how do we show happiness? How do Jews show happiness? We pray. We really give thanks. Modim anachnu lach. Thank you, Hashem. 3 times a day we say it. We give thanksgiving. Not just once a year. Thanksgiving is every day. 3 times a day, at least. Right? And what's another way that we celebrate? We learn. We learn more. We increase our learning. Should have an extra class. Many synagogues around the world, there's a Yom Iyun on Thanksgiving. There's businessmen don't have to go to business today. The workers don't have to go to work today. So stay in shul a little bit longer and let's learn something. Thanksgiving is a special day. Rav Nota Greenblatt, who is Rabbi Hollander's posek, he wrote, if there were no Thanksgiving, it would have to be up to the Jews to invent it. That's how important the holiday is. All right, and with that, I want to open the floor to any questions that you might have. I'm going to pause the recording.